Welcome to Just Champions, a podcast by Equitas, which focuses on the prosecution of sexual violence, domestic violence, stalking, and trafficking from the perspective of the prosecutors who handle these cases, the allied professionals with whom they collaborate, and the victims and communities that they serve. I'm Jennifer Long, the CEO and co-founder of Equitas, and a former prosecutor specializing in adult and child sexual abuse, intimate partner violence, stalking, and sexual exploitation. This is the inaugural season of Just Champions, where we will explore the ways prosecutors influence justice and safety through the lens of our guests who impacted safety and justice for victims in ways you may not expect. In this episode, I'm joined by Academy Award nominee Abigail Breslin. Abbie has starred in over 20 films that you likely know, including Little Miss Sunshine, August Osage County, Zombieland, Stillwater, and most recently in Miranda's Victim as the incredibly heroic Trish Weir, the victim of a serial rapist. Abbie is a fierce advocate for victims of domestic violence and sexual assault, and she is committed to creating paths forward for victims to become survivors. Okay, well, hello, Abbie. Thank you so much for getting on with me today and talking. Talking about so many different things. The career that brought you to the decision to use film to help elevate victims' experiences and victims' voices, and just how active and amazing you've been in the anti-sexual violence, domestic violence, stalking, human trafficking. Really just an incredible woman, and really wonderful to get to know you through this process and to watch how you help portray victims in such a sensitive, respectful, really deep light that I think has helped the public understand what they go through. So thank you.
Thank you so much. That means so much, especially coming from someone like you who has, basically dedicated your life to this kind of work. I mean, it's an honor to know you, and I'm so happy to be able to have this conversation with you.
Abbie, that is so great. And I thank you so much for saying that. It's very mutual. It's very mutual. And I thought, as you know, you and I were connected through a mutual friend, and in large part because of your portrayal of Trish Weir, who was a victim of Ernesto Miranda, who's a defendant in one of the most storied cases in criminal law. But before I even, I want to talk a little bit about that movie in a few moments. But, people know you for your incredible film career, but they may not understand what drew you to it. So if you want to just tell me a little bit about your career and how you became to be an actor.
Well, I started acting when I was about 3 years old. My older brother, Spencer, was an actor, is still an actor. And I guess I kind of just fell in his footsteps. But the real story is that, I did a commercial when I was 3 years old for Toys R Us. And then I went on an audition basically as a favor to my brother's agent at the time, because she needed to send in a 5-year-old girl for an audition for a movie called Signs, directed by M. Night Shyamalan. And she was like, I don't have a lot of girls in New York, but when M. Night Shyamalan did The Sixth Sense, I put Haley Joel Osment in that, and so do you think Abbie would have any interest? And my mom came into my bedroom at the time, and I was brushing my doll's hair on the bed, and my mom thought, Abbie's really shy. She's not really the archetype of what people think the child actor is, and so she came in and she said to me, do you want to go on an audition for a movie? And I said, yes, I'm ready. So I ended up going in, auditioning, and I ended up booking the film, and I've loved it ever since. So, but I've been, one of the most important things, and I do credit my mom a lot for this, is that throughout my life, especially when I was younger, now I'm 28, but when I was younger and starting out, my mom and I would discuss every part that we took on, because it was very important to both of us that as I started out, but then as I got, most kid roles are kind of, they're just the young kids and very sweet and whatever. But as I got older and started going into my teen years and then into young adulthood, it was really important that the characters I portrayed were women that were strong and independent and could fight their own battles and be their own advocates in a lot of ways, even if they were in really difficult and tumultuous situations. And so that's always been kind of my MO, is really properly, to the best of my abilities. I mean, I also do zombie movies. So, but in all of it, that ultimately the woman I would be portraying would triumph over her circumstances.
No, that's amazing. And hey, don't diss the zombie movies. I think that's part of the coping, especially when we're not.
Oh, it's my favorite.
Mine. Yeah, love it. I don't know if you'd be my friend when you knew if you knew my late night TV watching just to clean my brain. It's not very highbrow.
Trust me, I'm the same way.
And it's good, right? It helps. I mean, it helps clean the soul. It's creative. And,
I think everything has its own place. And
it sure does.
I mean, even if I'm watching housewives throw Chardonnay at one another, it serves a purpose.
Yeah, you're talking to the right girl from Real Housewives of New Jersey.
Oh, I'm the most obsessive person.
Yes.
Over that show. Every iteration of it.
No, absolutely. And so you have such a range, and and such a following. You pretty much could do any film that you would want to do. So the fact again that you would take on a role of Trish Weir, and for people who haven't seen the movie Miranda's Victim, I would 1000% recommend that you make a commitment to yourself tonight, for the weekend, that you sit down and watch this film, which tells the story of Miranda v. Arizona, which for lawyers and prosecutors listening, a Miranda warning is one of the most basic legal issues that may come up in a case. And as a prosecutor myself, as a law student, I certainly read the case. As a prosecutor, I analyzed and probably litigated hundreds of motions that involved Miranda warnings. And maybe I knew at one point that this case sprung from a serial rape case, but if I did, I had completely forgotten until a few months ago when we were introduced by our friend Erica, and Erica reminded me that this film was out and that it told the story. And once I had the opportunity to watch it, I was just blown away, because as prosecutors, it's so hard sometimes to tell the narrative to the public of what the victim's experience is from the crime through the entire process and how they interact. And
Right.
I loved how you portrayed it. It was so respectful, so wonderful. And so I'm curious how you became involved in the film and what led to your decision to play Trish.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And I mean, I am a sexual assault and domestic violence survivor myself. And so it was for sure not something that I took on lightly to do this film. When I got sent the script, my agent had kind of warned me that, you have to understand this is a film about a serious subject matter and a subject matter that is unfortunately too close to home in a lot of ways for me. So I had that kind of foresight and that kind of trigger warning before I even read it. But I read it and I was so moved. I had no idea. I mean, I'm a Law and Order SVU fanatic. So I knew what the Miranda rights were, but I never really had, I'm not a prosecutor or anything. I never looked into or researched what the Miranda rights were. So I did not know that this was where it stemmed from. But upon reading it and seeing how strong Trish Weir was and is to this day, for not only standing up in a time when it was not really a good time in history to be standing up for survivors of rape and domestic violence or anything like that. Her courage gave me, I guess, the motivation to say, I was like, do I really want to take this on? I know that it's going to be tolling on me,
Yeah.
physically and emotionally and mentally, whatever. But I thought if she could do this and not only stand up to her assailant once, but twice in court, I think I can make a movie.
No, and that's
what drew me to it.
No, it's a great tribute to her. I mean, and from what I could tell, one of the only victim who came forward to report the sexual violence. So an extreme act of courage to
Mhm.
try to achieve justice.
And at such a young age. I mean, she was only 18 years old.
Yeah, it's truly incredible. And as we have our conversation too, I think some of the things you portray in the film about the consequences to individuals who do report, it's a very stark reminder. But the first thing I want to go on, and I think this film very sensitively, respectfully, if you will, demonstrated the horror of sexual violence, of experiencing the crime itself without being gratuitous. And so we'll talk about the criminal justice scene, but I'm just curious, I mean, preparing yourself to go into a film like this, a role like this, how do you prepare? How do you take care of yourself through the process as an actor?
Well, I'm very lucky. I will really give a lot of credit to the cast and the crew, because it was very important to me, as you said, and I'm glad that it came across, that we wanted to handle, especially the actual assault scene. And, that was probably the most difficult day of filming, one of the most. But we didn't want it to feel exploitive or gratuitous, as you said. We wanted to show how horrible it is without making it seem just shock value, kind of. But it was important that we also, I said to Michelle Danner, the director, who's amazing, I had said, I don't want you guys to, tiptoe around me or walk on eggshells about it. I think it's really important to show how truly terrible sexual assault is and how much pain it causes. So I really respected the way that she and the DP and the camera crew and all of us handled it. But I guess the way that I prepared for it was we were very lucky. We had an amazing intimacy coordinator on set named Samantha.
Mhm.
She was great, and she spoke with everybody individually, and we had numerous conversations about. And I think that's really what's important about doing a film like this, where you do have to do these very intimate and scary moments.
Mhm.
Being able to communicate with the people that you're working with and say, yes, you can touch me here, but you can't touch me here. Or,
Right.
for me, a trigger for me is having my hair pulled, and so we were she was like, okay, so we're not going to go near that, or we're not going to go near the throat, or we're not going to, just certain things like that. And it was also important that Sebastian Quinn, who plays Miranda in it, who's, by the way, like, I could not have chosen a better co-star to have. And you met Sebi, and
I
he's
sure did. Yeah, amazing.
one of my best friends to this day. And I truly could not have wished, hoped, prayed for a better partner in crime, no pun intended, to do this film with, because it's tricky when you're doing this. You want to be respectful of the situation, and I wanted also, when you think about it, when you're on a set, there's a ton of women on a set, there's a ton of men, and as we know, sexual assault can happen to both men and women. It's more prevalent probably for women, but it goes both ways. And I really wanted to make sure too that if people felt uncomfortable with what they were seeing on the monitors and everything that they had, that they felt okay being there. And Sebi was great. And it's hard because you want to be respectful of the material and but you also have to find moments of levity. So
Right.
whether it was me bumping my head, on the car door, even though it's not obviously not a funny scene, but you have to find those moments where you can take a moment and have a laugh and have a breath. And honestly, I was so grateful that there was no rush to get it done. There were times when I said, you know what, I need a break right now.
Yep.
And they would let me have a break. And preparing for it was just, I didn't feel like I needed too much preparation other than knowing more about Trisha's story and who she was as a person, because I know the feeling of feeling violated. So that was, I guess, just learning more about Trish was really my main source of preparation.
And then before I ask you a little bit about Trish, just also, I mean, I think that was the thing that was so important to demonstrate the violation. And even just the way you're describing, I feel like this conversation is important because so much of what you're talking about is consent and control. And obviously, you're in a controlled environment.
Yeah.
Doing something that can feel very emotional and scary in that moment, and it's not even actually happening. And I
Right.
think, you know, you portrayed it in a way too that helps us understand what she went through, and just I think helping listeners understand this issue of consent in a world where I think everything is hypersexualized and violence is we're desensitized to it, and yet you were able to really portray the terror in that moment and what she was feeling. And the levity, I know what you mean. I mean, as prosecutors, we did sometimes you are seeing, especially the sex crimes and the domestic violence and child abuse. These are people who are supposed to love you, the victims, and
Yeah.
they are not only betraying trust, but they are really committing horrific crimes, to heightened violence. And so that you can maintain some clarity of mind and be compassionate for the victim and maybe sometimes process what you're reading that's so horrific. You find the humor and the beauty in other things.
Well, because, and that's
Yeah.
one of the things that, not to cut you off, but
No.
it's one of the things that I've learned too of being personally in my real life a survivor of these kind of crimes. You know, we survivors, we are so full, complex human beings, and it was important to me too to not just have her be solely defined by this horrible thing that she experienced, but she's also a full human being with a full life. Like I
Yep.
think sometimes when with different people in my life, when I've shared about what I've been through with domestic violence and sexual assault, they kind of look at you like, oh, I'm so sorry, and they kind of but I still laugh and I still have a great life and I still have sex and I'm still a full human being, even though I've went through this trauma. So I think it's important that we don't just see survivors as solely victims.
No, absolutely. And you are so respectful to Trish. How did you prepare to make sure it was her voice coming out in this film?
Well, I had what was really a privilege was George Colbert really did, the writer of Miranda's Victim. He really did his homework and really he spent a lot of time with Trish herself and wanted her blessing and her permission to make this film. So basically everything, I mean, he was writing the script with her basically being there and giving him exact moments that had happened. So it was really already laid out for me. There wasn't a ton of information that I could find independently about her. And this was the first time that she ever decided to share her story. And I'm so grateful and honored that she trusted us with this story because it cannot be easy. And I was so concerned that when I met her, she was going to be like, oh God, I don't know if I want this girl playing, it's intimidating to play a real
Sure.
life person, especially when it's something so sensitive. And I just wanted to make sure that she felt that we were handling it in a tasteful and respectful manner, because she did entrust us so much with her life. And so getting to meet her on set was just a euphoric moment. She was
Yeah.
amazing. And she is actually in the film. She has a cameo in it.
No, and that and incredible. I mean, what a moment, a full circle for her to really see this sharing her story having the impact. And that there are so many scenes, and I think one of the most special pieces about this film is that it does dive into so many different part of a victim's experience through the process, not just the experience of the crime, but the experience being interviewed and being on trial, also not in sensational ways, and really in a very nuanced way that I know as a prosecutor. And when you joined us in New Orleans with Sebastian to talk about it, I think the faculty, some prosecutors, law enforcement, and medical, some of the prosecutor participants really saw a lot of, truth in the different moments.
Yeah,
And
I was
so
going to ask you that too.
yeah,
I can ask a question. Like, did you feel, because like I said, I'm a Law and Order aficionado, but did it ring true to you in terms of court cases?
sure. Oh, well, absolutely. And of course, you're chronicling one of the most famous. But just even the interview scene. I mean, so
Yeah.
the first interview scene, I mean, again, it's hard. If we had many days, I think I'd go through each scene with you piece by piece because there are these little moments. But that interview scene, the first one where it's the investigator talking to you, I think your sister and your mom are there, and it did ring true because even from a prosecutor's perspective, when you're meeting a victim and interviewing them, you really have to sit and listen and
Yeah.
understand, right? That if the victim understands the question and maybe follow up or they have the context to answer. And so I'm thinking about the scene, the part of the interview where Trish is being asked questions about the assault and based on her sexual inexperience, at the point where she's asked what penetrated her, it's a first part of confusion, I would just say, in terms of, and again, this does ring true because especially when we have young children. I mean, they've never, and again, we're going to use, graphic language here because this is about prosecution. So they haven't maybe ever seen a penis before. They've
Right.
certainly never been penetrated before. So really trying to figure out the language, and that was one of the issues that came up here. And then of course we know later on how the defense usually jumps on our victims. Oh, this is an inconsistency. And so as prosecutors and investigators, we try to explain it at trial, but in the
Right.
interview it can be so important. So can you talk about that scene, because that was one of the greatest ones I thought that really portrayed a real true moment in sexual assault cases.
Um, yeah, no, I mean, that scene was definitely difficult because I think what a lot of people don't necessarily understand, that I've come to know, by being a survivor myself, your memories don't work in a normal way after a trauma like that. Um, you there are things that have come back to my memory about my assault that I might not have remembered 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years,
Yeah.
it's not a linear kind of thought pattern because there's a lot of self-preservation that goes into your body when you're being under attack like that. And so I think it's not abnormal for things to come out in pieces. I think for somebody like Trish, who was a virgin at the time of her assault, I mean, it was also in the 60s. It's not like, there was Instagram and TikTok where you can kind of see, and
Yeah.
kids now are much more advanced in that
Right.
realm. I think it's not abnormal that she didn't know. And also when you're being questioned about it, it's especially when you're being questioned by a man. And I think, Enrique Murciano who plays Detective Cooley in it. He is such a great guy. And I think he handled it really well. He still had to ask the questions that he had to ask, but he did it in a compassionate enough way where she felt more comfortable with him. And I will say about Enrique too, because he knew that this story really touched a sore spot for me. He brought his dog Chattahoochee to set almost every day and would let him just come into my trailer because he's like, I think he wants to be there with you. So he was almost like became my therapy dog on set. So shout out to Enrique. He was great.
That's
yeah.
fantastic.
but like, so I think that it's, that was a difficult scene because she's still so shell shocked from what has happened. And plus she has this pressure from her mom, which, Mireille, like plays my mom in it, and she's so amazing. And so is Emily Van Camp, who plays my sister Anne. But, it really is, I think that scene really encapsulates a certain time period as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Even just the, can you take a lie detector? Are you willing to, the fact that you're coming in and saying I'm a victim of this awful crime and you want me to prove that I'm not a liar.
Yes.
I think that Trish at that age was able to understand how wrong that is.
Yes. And interestingly, I mean, it won't surprise you. We wrote a few years ago on the use of polygraphs against victims and why not only is it, against the VAWA guidelines, but why it's what a mistake it is and how negative it is and unhelpful. So, we think sometimes we think we've come a long way since the 60s, and every once in a while, these issues creep back in again. Right? Because for our sexual violence victims specifically, but all other gender-based violence, it's like they start from a point where we disbelieve them. We feel like they have to
it's like
prove that they're
guilty until
credible.
proven innocent.
Yes,
The opposite
exactly.
way. Yeah.
Exactly. And in no other crime do we really do that to our victims. And, other than that scene, and again, people could look at it and when you watch this, certainly there were points on the investigation and interactions that, people could find real things to say, oh gosh, I'm glad we don't do that anymore. On the
There are
other
definitely some
hand,
cringe moments for sure.
yes. On the other hand, there were also for the 60s, I found myself at sometimes saying, wow, it's like it was fantastic to see Detective Cooley, that character, and his partner at one point really talking about believing you even back in the day. At the beginning. And so some of those moments were really empowering to watch, even with all the polygraph and everything else.
And
going on.
Trish said, she has said that she felt very lucky that the investigators were, as much as they were doing their job and they had to fact find and, things like that, they believed her. I think as soon as they saw her, they knew. And I think that was quite progressive for the time period.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, so just going on with these champions, there's another scene in the film, and this is where the prosecutor, who I think was played by Luke Wilson, who comes to your house.
My homie.
After the Supreme Court reverses the Miranda conviction and sends the case back. And so this is going to mean that your character, that Trish, is going to have to testify again at trial. And by this point, she's not 18 anymore. She's married. She has a child. She has a husband. Not, we'll talk about his reaction. Not a great guy. But that was a great scene too. And I really did love it because that's one of the things we do in our trainings. We try to talk to the prosecutors. We have what's going on, the trial, the things that the prosecutor is putting forth in court. And of course, for the benefit of seeking safety for the victim. But then there's all these other collateral things that a victim has to deal with that we have to always keep front of mind as when we're being victim centered.
Right.
Would you talk about that? Because that was a great scene, I thought, illustrating that point.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really a testament also to Luke Wilson, who is still one of my very good friends. And, I can't stress enough that this cast was really like, especially a lot of the men in in the film became like really like big brothers to me, and they were
Yeah.
so protective of me and constantly checking in on me and making sure I was okay and safe and felt safe. And I think Luke's character, Lawrence Turoff, who is the prosecutor, um, he I think that it angers him, this case, and he really wants to see Trish stand up to him again. But it's a very complicated scene because there's so many layers to it now. Like you said, she's not 18 anymore. She doesn't have the protection necessarily of her, mom and her sister, and she's with a husband who is unfortunately not a great guy, and she doesn't even want him to know that this happened in the first place.
Right.
So I think there's a lot of layers to it, and I feel for his character so hard in that scene for wanting to give her justice. And you can kind of, what I tried to do was portray that, she does want to do it, but she's terrified of the ramifications. And I think it's very important too to not shame people for not reporting. I think it's important to report. And if I could go back in time and, gotten justice for what had happened to me, I would certainly, hindsight is 2020, but there are so many factors. It's a very, very, I think probably, if you would agree, that one of the hardest crimes to really prosecute. And
very complicated. Yes.
Very complicated. And so I think it's just that scene and the following scene with my on-screen husband, who actually is the real life husband of Emily Van Camp, who plays my sister.
That must have been hard when he went had to forget that for her, because in character, I mean, he was truly, I mean, horrific. Abbie isn't even.
And so the opposite in real life. So
right, of course,
guy in the world, but
right, of course.
That scene with him was actually in some ways more difficult than even doing the actual assault scene, because to me, it also touched on domestic violence and the way that he spoke to her. And, domestic violence isn't always just being hit or punched or whatever. It's also in the mental and emotional abuse that people go through. And it reminded me so much of my own relationship that I had been in that was abusive. And that scene was really hard because, Josh Bowman is a great actor. And, in between takes, we'd be, having fun, whatever. But in those scenes, I mean, it's no wonder that she didn't want to prosecute again.
No, and it was brilliant. I mean, thankfully, he's such a great actor, because the people have to see that. That's real life I mean, it is realistic and especially, I mean, we work on, I think I've told you, cold cases. Like, people get assaulted and then their life goes on. And these cases sometimes get reopened up. They take a long time, and we ask so much of the victims. So, I mean, I think just showing one piece outside of the whole crime of just the pressure and the abuse and just the name calling that happened there, and what personal price she would have to pay in making a decision again back in the 60s. You have a child. Do you stay with someone like this? Do you risk your name getting out? So I think that whole decision point. And then Luke Wilson's character, the prosecutor, who was talking to you, saying to you, you can do this, but not coercive, not pressuring you, not putting you down. Those were two.
My favorite line in that scene is when he says, I'm not asking this for me.
Yes.
And I think that's such a layered, and the way that he portrayed it is such a layered, line. And I do think that he did give her that push, because the following scene is with Josh Bowman, who plays Charles, Trish's husband, and he's berating her for being a victim. And I don't think that if she hadn't had that conversation with Turoff, that she would have been able to stand her ground. And that just goes to show her strength, where she says, you know what, I'm going to testify.
I love that scene. Yes.
And it's always, whenever I've seen it in theaters with like an audience, that is the part where every woman in the audience just stands up and is like, woo, go girl, like go for it. Because it is, she's like, you know what? screw you. I'm doing it.
No, exactly. Oh my, I got chills because you're right. I mean, it's like Trish, we can all relate to Trish. You know, it was like she was an ordinary citizen, an extraordinary citizen, living, doing like the most important ordinary things, having a family, caring for your child, living her life, not asking for any of this. And I just loved that scene. I loved the look on your face. It was perfection. It was perfection.
Thank
I'm
you so much.
cheering right now.
Thank you. It was a team effort.
So, and so that prosecutor really was the champion. And again, knowing that this did track the case, another scene, and I know you're not in it, but I was curious your reaction when you watched it. That scene where your husband Charles is picked up on a DUI, and he comes into the police station, and the prosecutor comes in with Detective Cooley and talks to him and really says, I think he goes through, well, I would love you to describe it because he goes through what you were about to do, that you were the one
Yeah.
who made the report. Can you
Yeah.
talk about that and your reaction when you saw it on film? I love that scene.
Yeah. That scene actually made me cry because it also echoed kind of the relationships, weirdly, like the relationships that we had on set, where it really felt like, and it's true to what Trish felt too, that she had these people who really were kind of like guardian angels for her and were having her back. And he basically, Lawrence Turoff, the prosecutor, goes in after Charles is picked up for a DUI, and Detective Cooley is not as as is not as
Subtle,
I don't know
we'll
what the
just
word
say.
is, not as not as empathetic, so to speak,
Yeah.
as Turoff is. And he basically shows him these pictures of Miranda's other victims, and says, out of all these people, there was this one shy girl who wanted to say that she was going to take him off the streets. What would you call a person who did that? And he says, a hero, a hero. And it's so true. I mean, to have that kind of level of strength
Yeah.
at that point when all the odds are basically against you, and you've already heard that this terrible thing that's happened to you has been overturned by Supreme Court, the
Yeah.
highest you can go.
Right.
It feels like she had said to me at one point when I had spoken with the real Trish, that it's really an uphill battle, and
Right.
that's exhausting. And so I think that scene was beautiful, and it really just affirmed to me that even though she had this not so amazing husband, there were still men then who were, in her corner and wanted to take care of her. And yeah, I appreciated that scene a lot.
Yeah, yeah, and it's interesting because you're reminding me of another piece with Charles, and this, I don't know that you and I ever talked about this, but this misunderstanding. So the Supreme Court reversed the case, and I think at one point Charles is like, when you said I was raped, and he's like, the Supreme Court didn't say that, and this is exactly what happens in the public. That case was reversed because of criminal legal procedure. Miranda wasn't given
Right.
his rights, not because someone thought the evidence didn't make the case and wasn't sufficient to show rape, but when these get reported, if you're not a lawyer, if you're reading a headline, you don't know. And that's what the victim's
And it
left with.
always seems like it comes across then, well, she lied.
Yep,
Then it's really based on a technicality.
exactly.
And that's what's so disheartening, is that then it's always the victim who's then labeled as a liar, doesn't, and he even says at one point, like, you want to be, America's Jezebel or something.
Yep.
And
Yes.
it's that, to me, is one of the most brutal lines, because it's like, she keeps saying it's not my fault, I was raped. And he's like, well, if the court says that you weren't, then you weren't. But that's not what they were
Exactly.
saying. They were saying he wasn't given the right process of being, and it's so brutal.
Yeah, no, and that's the brilliance of this film, that it really picked up on all those little experiences that add up so much. And so, I know we always talk about the trial, and we have this adversarial process, and it isn't comfortable. It is, I think, the best system because it does help, it protects fairness and due process while, a good, competent trained prosecutor should be able to put forth the case and to protect you. Although, the rulings aren't our decision. Sometimes, no matter how hard we try, the defense, and I am going to release, defense attorneys have an important job, but they really can unfairly.
And a hard job.
Right? Yeah, they have a hard job. But also sometimes, they know what they're doing. Their job is to discredit. So whether you're telling the truth or not, the job is to make sure that the jury thinks that you're not telling the truth. The prosecutor, no, we're there to do the truth, but on the opposite side. So I'm thinking about that cross-examination scene when they're talking about the identification, and it's a pretty aggressive scene where you're being questioned by the defense attorney on the circumstances of the identification. Not that you've said anything inconsistent, because you hadn't, but
Is
just
it the first trial or the second trial?
This is the second trial,
right?
Where they are, it was right before the redirect, with this very powerful moment where you talk about how you thought you were going to die. But it was a scene, I think Ryan Philippe is questioning you, and sort of about the fact that before you really identified Miranda, he said he was sorry. So he's like trying to cast doubt. I think ultimately the identification outside of court isn't admitted, and the glasses, the fact that he was the only one with the glasses in the lineup. So again, things that you, as the victim, you didn't do any of those things. You're not in control of that, but he's taking the chance to pull you apart on the stand.
Right.
Can you talk about how you prepared, but even the experience of being cross-examined in the movie? It's not comfortable. And you did a great job, again, really portraying what it looks like when the victims are gone after like that.
Yeah. Well, thank you. It definitely, and I think that really does shed a light on why, so many people like to say, well, if I was raped, I would just, call the police immediately, and I would go to trial, and I'd get that, bleep, in prison, whatever. But it's, when you see that, you can understand why somebody wouldn't want to, because like you said, their whole job is to pick apart every single part of your life, who you are, and what you've been through, and try to paint you as a liar. Yep. And so that scene was very hard. Ryan is a great guy. Love Ryan. But, I think for that first scene, that was our actual first day working together.
Wow.
I've been working on the film, but that was the first scene that we did together. And so I kind of kept my distance a little bit from him. And I think we both did that because if we didn't, then we would probably just become really good buddies, and it would not be as strong. Yeah, we kind of kept our distance from one another, which was a strategic move for both of us. And then we became good friends. But it was definitely hard, and he is a great actor. And it's always so fun for me as an actor to work with somebody, because I have no idea what he's going to do. We really didn't rehearse that scene a lot. We had run the lines very like a dry run of just reading the lines. And then we saved, because we were also shooting on film, which is important to note, because film takes a lot longer to film sometimes than digital, because the film rolls will run out. And when you have these long courtroom scenes, sometimes we would have to stop in the middle of it because we would roll out of the film. And so then we would need to restock the film and then start over again. So it does add to that level of intensity, and trying to make sure that we're all hitting every single moment, because you don't want to have to do multiple films of roll film. So I had no idea what he was going to do in his performance when we did take one. And I think that we actually only did about 2 to 3 takes of that, because he was so jarring to me in that scene of really trying to discredit me, doing a great job at his job. But it was, I liked the difference between the way that his character questions me and cross-examines me versus when Alvin Moore in the first trial questions me, which is played by Andy Garcia, who is amazing. But he's a little bit gentler with her than than Flynn is during the second trial. And I think that it is a re-victimization in a way. It's like having it happen all over again. And we wanted to show that she had grown and changed a bit, but in that scene, it was very important to note that she kind of retracted back into that 18-year-old mentality of like, this is terrifying. So that was a really brutal scene to film. And even people who were sitting, some of the extras in the courtroom were like, he's being so mean. And towards the end of the day, I was like, I feel so bad. Like every single time I'm like, I'm making you cry.
But the thing is, that is the role of the defense attorney. I mean, he is fighting for the life of his client. That's what he's doing. And that's why, I mean, for our prosecutors, it's so important that they then, and again, it's also a balance, even though, Andy Garcia's character or that first trial, the first defense attorney, sometimes it's a tactic. Sometimes it's their personality. Sometimes it's a tactic. They go in gently because they want to persuade the jury. They want the jury to like them and maybe, say, oh, look, we like her. We feel sorry for this victim, but you don't believe her. And these are the reasons why. So those can be a little sneaky. Or you've got the second
The
type of defense
grandstander
attorney.
kind of.
Yeah, who goes after you and is really unnerving. And as someone, I mean, as a prosecutor, I always said I felt like we had the easiest jobs, the counsel, because our back is to the well, where it's like you are in the zone of trying your case. You're not looking at the people in the back of the courtroom. You don't see anything. You see the judge, you see the witness, you see the jurors next to you. But for witnesses, you're really looking out, and you're now also being asked to testify about really personal things in an open courtroom. And so, and under circumstances where you have someone who's the ultimate gaslighting, I mean, what happened. And our defense attorneys oftentimes know exactly what happened, but they're doing their job, and it can be brutal, which is why I think I loved the redirect so much with Luke Wilson. But that was, again, because he brought it back. He really brought back, I mean, we talk about having the victim, recreating the reality with a victim, that scene where you're having the flashbacks, which was so powerful. Again, I can't imagine how hard that was. That was exactly what you did for the courtroom. Can you talk about the experience, I guess, you were trying to communicate in that scene?
That scene, that scene was my the most cathartic scene during that redirect in the second trial. That was for me. That was a scene where I really did pull on personal experience, and I was like, this is as much as I was portraying Trish and what she had been through, it also felt like it was for every victim out there. And doing that, it's when she is finally like, you know what, I'm taking back my power. And if, when you watch the movie, it's actually really the only time that she actually looks at Miranda. And that was a really important, I said to Michelle, I was like, I want her to look him dead in the eye when she tells him, and that was a real thing that Trish actually said was she stood up and said, I thought I was going to die. And so to know that that was actually something that she actually said was devastating, but it also felt like such a release. And so doing that scene was really a testament to Lawrence Turoff, the prosecutor, for saying, you know what, she went through this brutal cross-examination, but we're gonna now regroup and we're gonna figure this out. And when he says, how did you feel? And she goes through that flashback, which was the actual assault scene, which we filmed actually on the last day of filming. We filmed that scene. And it took about 7 hours, I think. I mean, we had about 37 shots that we had to do.
Oh my gosh.
We were in the backseat of this car, and it was really hot in the middle of July in New Jersey. So hot and humid. And we went until the sun was up. And so, so doing that, and, it just really, it took a bit for me to get up to that level of being there, because as an actor, it's scary to have to access those real life emotions. But I was like, I have to tap into this. And it just, one of the notes that Michelle gave me, she came over and whispered to me and she said, send him to prison right now. When you say this, send him to prison. And then that was the take, and we got it. And it was one of my favorite scenes to film, because it was just really cathartic, and it felt right. I felt it on a core level,
Yeah. Well, and we felt it. We felt it watching. And, I know you've talked about prosecutors and the investigators and the people even on the set being your guardian angels. I know the judge, we could, like I said, if this were a longer interview, the judge, played by Donald Sutherland, just gave such an amazing, again, ahead of his time statement at the time of following the verdict by the jury about really talking about what the defendant was afforded to protect his rights, which as it should be, but contrasting that to what you were not afforded. None of those things.
Yeah. My mom, actually, that's the part that really makes her cry too, is when he says, when Donald Sutherland's character, and may he rest in peace, and he passed away recently. He's wonderful, wonderful man. But when he says, now your victim must live with the trauma of your horrendous crime. And that part always gets my mom, because, she has seen what I've dealt with complex post-traumatic stress disorder from abuse and everything else. And, he was actually the first person to sign on to the film.
Wow.
Donald Sutherland, because he really believed in telling the story, and really wanted, and he was like, I want to play that judge because I want to be able to say that to that guy, and I love him, because it's so important too for men in positions of power too, in this industry, in every industry, to be allies in this cause, and to stand up and say, this is wrong. So I think him, and it was unfortunately his final movie, but I was so honored that he did it, and he was very moved and touched by the story. So, all in all, everybody from Ryan to Donald to Luke to Sebastian to Andy Garcia to Brent Sexton to Enrique Murciano. I mean, all the guys on the set were, and Josh Bowman as well. They were such an amazing, exceptional, example of men who are good men.
Yeah. Good allies. No, the dream team for sure. Really, all notable actors coming together and telling such an important
and
story.
Nolan Gould too, who plays Jimmy,
Yes. And
great guy.
that's never been, that a story that hadn't been told before. So incredible. And so, as you know, we train prosecutors. I teach a Georgetown Law, Equitas does to law students, and we try to talk about the role of the prosecutor. And so you have this amazing, you've portrayed a victim and then kind of gone through the legal process, and you are a survivor and you have that perspective. And so would you tell law students to consider prosecution? Do you think that it's a profession that people should go into and consider?
Oh, I think it's so important. I think it's so important. I think it is. It's a very, I can only assume, an extremely grueling and tough job. But I think it's probably, if I wasn't an actor, I would definitely go into a field like this, because I think it's so important for victims of any crime, aside from sexual assault or domestic violence, but especially in cases like that, we need those guardian angels who will go to bat for us, who will fight for what we need to do to put people away that deserve to be put away, or to at least get justice for for the victim or survivor. You know, I think it's one of the most important things in the world, because our legal system, especially in this country, it's really all that we have to be able to, you know, to have a fair legal process. But I think in terms of becoming a prosecutor, I know that they have been godsends for so many people that I know who have gone through horrific things and have gotten people prosecuted, and they still keep in touch with their prosecutors, and they're like, became our best friend, you know. And I think it's such a hard but very, very important job. So and you know, meeting you and everything, I think you're such a shining example of how to do it right. And I hope more people go into that field, truly.
Oh, Abbie, that's so wonderful. And I mean, it's really been an honor to meet you. It's been so wonderful to talk to you. I mean, again, and pass on the kudos to the rest of the cast. But what you did in this movie, you told a story as it hasn't been done. And I mean, all credit to the director too, Michelle Danner, and she and the production company were very generous in allowing us to show parts of this film when we were in NOLA, to have you talk about the experience, the victim's experience, and how film can help portray that. I just can't thank you enough for all you do and for today. Thank you so much.
So much. And I'm always so honored to be able to sit down. This is one of the most important roles I think I've ever done in my life. And I'm so glad that, you know, we're able to shed light on this topic. And yeah, I thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Abbie.